The road dust never settled. The stagecoach lurched to a halt in a cloud of yellow dust that seemed to hang in the air like a bad omen. Josephine Calder pressed a handkerchief to her nose, squinting through the haze at what would be her new home, Dead Horse, Wyoming. The town sprawled before her like a collection of weathered bones bleaching in the August sun, all crooked buildings and rutted streets that looked as tired as she felt. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down, his voice rough as the gravel road they'd traveled. "Welcome to Dead Horse." Jo gathered her medical bag and the single trunk that held everything she owned in this world. Her hands, steady as they'd been when she'd sewn up soldiers barely older than boys, trembled slightly as she stepped down from the coach. The weight of Kansas and everything she'd left behind there pressed heavy on her shoulders. The town's main street stretched before her, flanked by false-fronted buildings that leaned against each other like drunks after a long night. The Gilded Dollar Saloon dominated one side, its bat-wing doors swaying in the hot breeze. Across from it, she spotted what must be her destination, a narrow building with a hand-painted sign reading "Doctor's Office" in fading black letters. Jo had answered the advertisement on impulse, drawn by the promise of a fresh start where no one knew her name or what had happened in those blood-soaked tents outside Gettysburg, where no one would look at her with that particular mixture of pity and disgust that had driven her from Kansas City. The few townspeople on the street watched her progress with curious eyes. A woman in a crisp blue dress, the banker's wife. Jo guessed from the quality of the fabric whispered behind her gloved hand to a companion. Two cowboys lounging outside the general store tipped their hats but said nothing. Jo kept her chin high and her stride purposeful, the way she'd learned to walk through field hospitals when showing fear meant losing respect. The doctor's office was unlocked, its interior dim and stifling. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light from the single window. The previous physician had left in a hurry. She'd been told in the telegram. Called back east by family troubles, what she found was a shambles empty medicine bottles scattered across shelves, instruments that hadn't been properly cleaned, and an examination table that looked like it hadn't seen a patient in months. Jo set down her bag and rolled up her sleeves. Work had always been her salvation. She could lose herself in the familiar ritual of organizing supplies, cleaning instruments, making order from chaos. The sun tracked across the floor as she worked, and by the time shadows began to lengthen, she'd transformed the front room into something resembling a proper medical office. It was then, as she stepped outside to shake dust from a rug, that she saw him. He sat slumped against the hitching post in front of her office, hat pulled low over his face, one leg stretched out at an awkward angle. Everything about him spoke of exhaustion, from the trail dust ground into his worn leather chaps to the way his shoulders curved inward like a man carrying an invisible weight. A Colt Navy revolver hung loose in its holster, the metal spotted with rust. Jo approached cautiously. In her experience, men who looked this far gone could be dangerous when startled. "Sir," she kept her voice gentle but firm. "Are you all right?" He lifted his head slowly, and Jo found herself looking into eyes the color of winter sky, pale blue and utterly empty. The kind of eyes she'd seen too many times in the war, in men who'd witnessed things that had carved out pieces of their souls. "Ma'am." His voice came out cracked and dry. "Didn't mean to trouble you, just needed to rest a spell." Now that she was closer, Jo could see the dark stain on his pants leg, the way he kept his weight off that foot. "You're hurt." "It's nothing. I'm a doctor. Let me be the judge of that." Something flickered in those empty eyes, surprise, maybe, or disbelief. "You're the new doc." "Doctor Josephine Calder. And you are—" "Eli Cade." He made no move to stand or offer his hand. "Like I said, don't mean to be a bother. I'll move along." But when he tried to rise, his leg buckled. Jo moved without thinking, catching his arm to steady him. He flinched at the contact but didn't pull away. "Mr. Cade, you need medical attention. Come inside." "Can't pay. I didn't ask for payment." He studied her for a long moment, And Joe had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing straight through her professional demeanor to something underneath. Why? It was such a simple question, but Joe found herself without a ready answer. Why help a stranger who clearly wanted none? Why care about another lost soul when she could barely tend to her own wounds? Because you need it, she said finally. Isn't that reason enough? Eli made a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so bitter. Nothing's ever that simple. Doc. But he let her help him inside, limping heavily. In the better light of the office, Joe could see the hollows carved into his cheeks, the tremor in his hands that spoke of more than just pain. This was a man running on nothing but stubborn will. Sit, she commanded, guiding him to the examination table. Let's see what we're dealing with. The wound on his thigh was several days old, a ragged gash that had been crudely bandaged but was showing signs of infection. Joe worked in silence, cleaning and dressing it properly while Eli stared at the wall with those 1,000-yard eyes. When's the last time you slept? She asked as she wrapped fresh bandages around his leg. Really slept, Eli's mouth twisted. Can't rightly say. And ate. He shrugged. Joe finished her work and stepped back. The wound needs to be cleaned daily. You'll need somewhere clean to rest while it heals. I'll be fine. Always am. Mr. Cade. Look, Doc. He slid off the table, testing his weight on the injured leg. I appreciate what you've done, but I've been taking care of myself for a long time now. Don't need anyone's charity. Joe recognized the pride in his voice, the same stiff-necked independence she'd wrapped around herself like armor. There's a storage room out back. It's not much, but it has a cot. You could sleep there tonight. Let me check the wound in the morning. Eli's eyes narrowed. Why would you do that? You don't know me from Adam. No, Joe admitted. But I know what it's like to be so tired you can't see straight, to be running from something that follows you even in your dreams. The words hung between them in the dusty air. Outside, she could hear the evening sounds of the town coming alive, piano music from the saloon, the creak of wagon wheels, the distant lowing of cattle. Just one night, Eli said finally, and Joe heard the weight of exhaustion in every word. Come morning, I'll be on my way. She led him to the storage room, which was little more than a lean-to attached to the back of the building, but it was clean and dry, with a narrow cot and a wash basin. Eli stood in the doorway like he'd forgotten how to enter a room properly. There's water for washing. Joe said, I'll bring you something to eat. Don't trouble yourself. It's no trouble. She left him there and returned to the main office, her mind already cataloging what supplies she had, what she'd need to order. Through the thin wall, she could hear the creak of the cot as Eli settled onto it. When she returned with a plate of bread and dried meat from her own provisions, she found him sitting on the edge of the cot, head in his hands. He looked up at her approach, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. She saw the raw exhaustion, the kind that went bone deep, the kind that came from fighting battles that couldn't be won. Thank you, he said quietly, taking the plate. Joe wanted to ask what had brought him to this point, what ghosts chased him through the night, but she knew better than most that some stories couldn't be told until the teller was ready. Get some rest, Mr. Cade, she said instead. The world will still be here come morning. As she closed the door behind her, she heard his voice, so soft she might have imagined it. That's what I'm afraid of. Joe returned to the main office and lit a lamp against the gathering darkness. Through the window, she could see the lights of Dead Horse coming alive, the saloon glowing like a beacon, lanterns flickering in windows like earthbound stars. She'd come here to escape her past, to find some measure of peace in this rough frontier town. But as she listened to the silence from the storage room, where a broken man tried to find his way to sleep, Joe wondered if Dead Horse might be less about escape and more about finding others who understood that some wounds never quite healed. They just learned to live with the scars. The prairie wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending dust devils dancing down the empty street. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the sound seemed to carry all the loneliness in the world. Jo pulled her shawl tighter and began preparing for the morning, trying not to think about the man in her storage room or the way his eyes had looked like her own when she caught her reflection in the mirror. In Dead Horse, it seemed. The road dust never quite settled. It just found new places to gather, new corners to fill with the weight of unspoken sorrows. He ain't just tired. The morning sun hadn't yet cleared the horizon when Jo heard movement from the storage room. She'd been up for an hour already, organizing her medical supplies and brewing coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Through the thin wall, she could hear the uneven footsteps, the sharp intake of breath that spoke of pain. She knocked gently on the door. "Mr. Cade, I need to check your wound." "I'm fine, Doc. Like I said, I'll be moving along." Jo pushed open the door to find Eli fully dressed, struggling to pull on his boot over the bandaged leg. His face was gray with exhaustion despite the night's rest, and she noticed his hands trembling as he worked at the leather. "You're not fine," she said firmly, "and you're certainly in no condition to ride. Ain't your concern. It is when you're my patient." Jo crossed her arms. "Sit down before you fall down." For a moment, they stared at each other in the dim morning light. Then Eli's shoulders sagged, and he sank back onto the cot. Up close, Jo could see the fever brightness in his eyes, the way sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning chill. She knelt to examine the wound, pleased to see the bandages had held through the night. "When you said you haven't slept," she said carefully as she worked, "what did you mean exactly?" Eli was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I sleep, just can't seem to rest. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there." Jo's hands stilled on the bandage. She knew that feeling all too well, the way certain memories waited in the darkness, ready to pounce the moment consciousness slipped. "Back where?" she asked gently. "Doesn't matter." He pulled away from her touch. "I just need to sleep. One night without dreams. That's all." Jo finished rewrapping the wound and stood. "You slept last night." "Did I?" Eli's laugh was hollow. "Couldn't tell. Still feel like I've been rode hard and put up wet for a month of Sundays." "Mr. Cade." "Eli, if you're going to keep poking at me, might as well use my given name." "Eli, then you need more than one night's rest. That wound needs at least a week to heal properly, and you're running a fever." "Can't stay." He stood abruptly, swaying slightly. "People in town won't take kindly to you housing someone like me." "Someone like you." "You'll hear soon enough. The good folks of Dead Horse have plenty to say about Eli Cade." As if summoned by his words, a sharp rap came at the front door. Jo found Mrs. Prudence Hartley on her doorstep, the banker's wife she'd noticed yesterday. Behind her stood two other women, their faces pinched with disapproval. "Dr. Calder, Mrs." Hartley's voice could have frozen water in July. "We've come to welcome you properly to Dead Horse." "How kind," Jo said, not moving from the doorway. "We also wanted to advise you about certain unsavory elements in our town." "Mrs." Hartley's eyes darted toward the alley that led to the storage room. "It's come to our attention that Eli Cade was seen entering your establishment last evening. Mr. Cade is a patient." "Mr. Cade," one of the other women sniffed, "is a drifter, a man of questionable character who refuses honest work and spends his time wandering the territory like some kind of wild animal. He brings trouble wherever he goes." "Mrs." Hartley added, "Just last month in Laramie." "I appreciate your concern." Jo interrupted, "But my medical practice is open to anyone who needs care. Dr. Calder, you must understand." "Mrs." Hartley leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "There are stories about that man. They say he talks to himself, wanders the desert for days without food or water. Sheriff Morrison says he's seen him standing in the rain, staring at nothing, like he's seeing ghosts. Joe thought of Eli's empty eyes, his desperate need for dreamless sleep. Perhaps he is. The women exchanged shocked glances. Mrs. Hartley drew herself up to her full height. I can see you're new to frontier life, doctor, but maintaining one's reputation is crucial for a woman in your position. Associating with men like Eli Cade will only bring you trouble. I'll take that under advisement. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. She closed the door on their affronted faces and turned to find Eli standing in the doorway to the back room, his expression unreadable. Told you, he said simply. I've dealt with worse than small-town gossips. Joe moved to her medicine cabinet, pulling out a bottle of willow bark tonic. Drink this. It'll help with the fever. Why are you doing this? Eli asked, accepting the cup she pressed into his hands. You heard them. I'm trouble. A man who sees things that aren't there. Joe was quiet for a moment, measuring her words. During the war, I worked in the field hospitals, saw things that no one should see. There was a young soldier, couldn't have been more than 17, took a bullet to the stomach. As he was dying, he kept asking for his mother, kept saying he could see her standing right beside me. She paused, lost in the memory. The other nurses said he was delirious, but I looked into his eyes, and I knew he was seeing something real, even if I couldn't. Sometimes I think the veil between this world and the next gets thin in places. Maybe some people just see through it better than others. Eli stared at her over the rim of the cup. You believe in ghosts, Doc? I believe in wounded souls trying to find peace. Whether you call them ghosts or memories or something else entirely doesn't much matter. And what if I told you I haven't had a proper night's sleep in 6 months, that every time I close my eyes, I see them, my men, burning, hear them calling my name while I just sat there, hiding like a coward? Joe met his gaze steadily. I'd say that sounds like a man carrying a weight no one should bear alone. Eli set down the cup with shaking hands. I wasn't always like this. Used to be. Normal. Had a crew, good men all. We were bringing cattle up from Texas, hired to scout ahead for trouble. Found it. All right. Whole Apache war party. Just waiting. He stopped, jaw working like he was chewing on the words. I tried to warn them, rode back fast as I could, but someone had already told the Apache we were coming. Someone who wanted us dead and the cattle scattered. His voice dropped to a whisper. They hit us at dawn. I was out checking the trail. Only reason I survived. By the time I got back, Joe waited, not pushing, letting the silence stretch between them. Fire everywhere, men screaming, and me hiding in the rocks like a yellow-bellied snake, watching it all happen. Couldn't do nothing but watch. Eli's hands clenched into fists. Now I see them when I sleep, hear them asking why I didn't save them. Survivor's guilt, Joe said softly. I've seen it before. That what you doctors call it? Eli laughed bitterly. Got a fancy name for everything, don't you? Having a name for something doesn't make it easier to bear. Just helps us understand we're not alone in carrying it. She moved to the window, looking out at the dusty street where life was beginning to stir. You can stay here as long as you need. Eli, I don't care what the town says. You will, when they start turning away from your services. When they whisper about the lady doctor who's taken up with the crazy drifter. Let them whisper. I've been the subject of worse gossip than anything dead horse can conjure up. Eli studied her with those two pale eyes. What are you running from, Doc? Joe's spine stiffened, but she didn't turn from the window. Who says I'm running? Takes one to know one. You've got that look like you're waiting for something to catch up with you. We all have our ghosts. Mr. Cade. The difference is, some of us have learned to stop looking over our shoulders. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Eli didn't call her on it, just nodded slowly. 1 week, he said finally. I'll stay 1 week, let the leg heal, then I'm gone, and I'll work for my keep. Plenty needs doing around here from the looks of it. Joe turned to face him. You need rest, not work. I need something to do with my hands. Idle time just makes the ghosts louder. He gestured around the dusty office. This place needs fixing up. I may be a broken-down cowboy, but I still know which end of a hammer to hold. Against her better judgment. Jo found herself nodding. She understood the need to keep busy, to exhaust the body in hopes the mind would follow. There's wood rot in the back steps, she admitted, and the roof leaks when it rains. I'll start there. Eli stood carefully, testing his weight on the injured leg. Doc, that thing you said about the veil being thin, you really believe that? Jo thought of all the times she'd felt watched in empty rooms, all the soldiers who'd died holding conversations with people no one else could see. I believe there's more to this world than what we can measure with our instruments, she said carefully. Whether that's comfort or curse, I suppose depends on what's waiting on the other side. Eli nodded like she'd confirmed something he'd long suspected. I just want to sleep, he said quietly. Just one night without them visiting. That's all I'm asking for. As he limped toward the back door, Jo called after him. Eli, what you said about being a coward surviving doesn't make you a coward. Sometimes it's the bravest thing a person can do. He paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the morning light. Maybe so, Doc, but it sure don't feel that way when you're the only one left to remember. Then he was gone, leaving Jo alone with her own memories and the ghost of understanding that passed between two broken souls, trying to find their way in a world that had no patience for the walking wounded. The night he slept, Jo woke to silence, not the ordinary quiet of early morning in Dead Horse, with its distant cattle and creaking wagon wheels, but a complete, almost unnatural stillness. She'd grown accustomed to the sounds from the storage room, the restless pacing, the muffled groans, the creak of the cot as Eli tossed and turned through another sleepless night. But now, nothing. Heart racing, she threw on her wrapper and hurried to the back room. The door stood slightly ajar, morning light spilling through in a narrow beam. She pushed it open carefully, afraid of what she might find. Eli lay on the cot, perfectly still, for one terrible moment. Jo thought, but then she saw the gentle rise and fall of his chest, heard the deep, even breathing of true sleep. His face, which had been drawn tight with exhaustion and pain for the 3 days he'd been here, had softened. The lines around his eyes had smoothed out, and his mouth had lost its grim set. He looked younger, she realized, peaceful, even. Jo backed out quietly, pulling the door closed. She'd seen plenty of men sleep, but there was something almost sacred about this, a man who'd been running on empty for so long finally finding rest. She went about her morning routine, trying not to make too much noise. 2 patients came by misses, Chen with her arthritic hands, and young Tommy Morrison with a split lip from a schoolyard scuffle. Jo tended to them efficiently, all the while listening for any sound from the back room. The sun was high overhead when she finally heard movement. She gave Eli a few minutes to orient himself before knocking softly. Come in. She found him sitting on the edge of the cot, staring at his hands like he'd never seen them before. When he looked up, there was something different in his eyes, not the emptiness she'd grown used to, but a kind of wondering disbelief. How long, he asked. Jo checked her pocket watch. 14 hours, near as I can tell. 14. He shook his head slowly. I can't remember the last time I slept more than 2. How do you feel? Eli seemed to consider this carefully, taking inventory of himself. Strange, like I've been underwater for months and just now broke the surface. He met her eyes. I didn't dream, not once. That's good, isn't it? I don't know. Kept waiting for them to come, but... He gestured helplessly. Nothing, just darkness, then waking up. Jo moved to check his wound, pleased to see the infection had cleared considerably. As she worked, Eli was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than before, less desperate, more contemplative. I ain't slept in days, he said suddenly, his voice soft with wonder. But you fixed that last night. Jo's hand stilled on the bandage. There was something in his tone, not flirtation or suggestion, but a raw gratitude that made her throat tight. "I didn't do anything," she said carefully. "You just finally felt safe enough to rest." Safe. Eli tested the word like it was foreign. "Haven't felt safe since—" He trailed off, then seemed to shake himself. "Doesn't matter. What matters is I slept. Really slept." Joe finished with the bandage and stepped back. The mind and body have ways of protecting themselves. Sometimes we just need the right conditions to let our guard down.
"And what condition is that this ratty old cot ain't nothing special?"
Joe considered her words carefully. Maybe it's not about the where, but the who, having someone stand watch, so to speak. Someone who understands. Eli looked at her for a long moment, and Joe felt exposed under that pale gaze, like he could see all the nights she'd sat up with her own ghosts. "You still have the dreams, don't you?" he asked quietly. "From the war." Joe turned away, busying herself with putting away her medical supplies. "We're not talking about me. Maybe we should be. I'm the doctor here, Mr. Cade. You're the patient." "Thought I was Eli now." There was the faintest hint of warmth in his voice, and Joe realized with a start that he was almost teasing her. "Don't mistake my professional courtesy for friendship," she said, but the words came out less sharp than she'd intended. "Wouldn't dream of it. Doc." He stood carefully, testing his leg. "Though I'm curious why a lady doctor who could practice anywhere chose a dusty nowhere town like Dead Horse. Perhaps I like dusty nowhere towns. Or perhaps you're running from something same as me." Joe whirled to face him. "I'm not—" She stopped, seeing the knowing look in his eyes. "That's none of your concern." "Fair enough." Eli moved toward the door, his gait steadier than it had been in days. "I'll get back to work on those steps. They're almost finished. You should rest more. One good night's sleep doesn't mean—" "I know what it doesn't mean." His voice was gentle but firm. "But I also know that for the first time in 6 months, I feel like I could survive another day. That's something. Doc, that's everything." He left her standing there, emotions she couldn't name swirling in her chest. She'd helped plenty of patients, saved lives, eased suffering, but there was something different about the gratitude in Eli's eyes. Something that reached past her professional defenses to the wounded healer underneath. The afternoon brought more patients, a ranch hand with a dislocated shoulder, Mrs. Patterson with her chronic headaches. Through it all, Joe could hear the steady rhythm of Eli's hammer, the occasional scrape of wood. Normal sounds. Living sounds. As evening approached, she found him sitting on the newly repaired steps, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Without thinking, she sat beside him, careful to leave a proper distance between them. "Looks good," she said, running her hand along the smooth wood. "It'll hold." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Used to build things, before. Me and my PA, we'd hire out during the slow seasons. Built barns, houses, even a church once." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Pa always said there was something holy about creating something solid in this world, something that would outlast you." "What happened to him? Your father?" "Cholera. Ma, too. I was 17. Eli's voice was matter-of-fact, but Joe heard the old pain underneath. "That's when I started riding cattle. Figured if I kept moving, nothing could catch me the way it caught them." But something did anyway. Something did. They sat in companionable silence as the sky turned shades of purple and gold. Joe found herself oddly reluctant to go inside, to break whatever spell had been woven by his unexpected rest and the quiet evening. "I should check your bandage again before bed," she said finally. "It can wait." Eli turned to look at her, and in the dying light, his eyes seemed less empty, more present. "Can I ask you something, Doc?" Joe nodded, not trusting her voice. "What was his name? The one who decided you weren't worth marrying after the war?" Joe's breath caught. "How did you—" Seen that look before, in women who gave everything to help and got nothing but judgment in return. His voice was gentle, no curiosity in it, just understanding. Whoever he was a fool. He was a respectable man who wanted a respectable wife. The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. And I was no longer... She couldn't finish. You were no longer what he expected you to be. Eli finished for her. Because you'd seen too much, done too much, became too much. Something like that. His loss. The simple statement, delivered without flourish or false sympathy, undid something in Joe's chest. She found herself blinking back tears she hadn't shed in years. We should go in, she said, standing abruptly. It's getting dark. Eli stood as well, moving with an ease that seemed to surprise him. Doc, thank you, not just for the leg, but for letting a broken-down cowboy sleep in your storage room. You're not broken, Joe said firmly. Bent, maybe, scarred, certainly, but not broken. That your professional opinion? That's my personal observation. They stood there in the gathering dusk, two damaged souls recognizing something familiar in each other. Then Joe turned and went inside, Eli following at a respectful distance. That night, as she lay in her own bed listening to the night sounds of dead horse, Joe realized the storage room was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, not the desperate stillness of exhaustion, but the peaceful silence of earned rest. For the first time since arriving in Dead Horse, she felt like she might have done something that mattered, not just patching up bodies, but maybe, just maybe, helping to mend something deeper. And if her own ghost seemed a little quieter that night, if her own sleep came a little easier, well, that was just coincidence. Wasn't it the sins they don't confess? The saloon was louder than usual that Friday night. Joe could hear the piano music and raucous laughter from her office, where she was treating Jake Sullivan for what he claimed was a disagreement with a fence post, but looked suspiciously like a fist to the jaw. Hold still, she told him, dabbing at the cut above his eye. This might sting. Jake hissed through his teeth. Doc, you ever think about getting married fine woman like you, setting up practice all alone? No, Joe said flatly. I don't. Just seems a shame is all. Pretty lady like yourself. Mr. Sullivan, I can stitch this cut, or I can let you explain to your wife why you came home looking like you've been brawling. Which would you prefer? Jake fell silent after that. As she worked, Joe's mind wandered to the man currently fixing her roof. Eli had been with her a week now, and the change in him was remarkable. He still had that haunted look around his eyes, still jumped at unexpected sounds, but he was sleeping, really sleeping most nights. The color had returned to his face, and she'd even caught him humming while he worked. There, she said, tying off the last stitch. Try to avoid any more fence posts. Jake paid and left, and Joe was cleaning up when she heard footsteps on the porch. Eli appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. Saw Jake leaving. He all right? He'll live. Joe dried her hands on a towel. Though his pride might be bruised for a while. Most men's pride could use some bruising. Eli shifted his weight, seeming uncertain. I was wondering, that is, if you're not too tired, would you sit a spell got coffee on? It was the first time he'd invited her to spend time with him outside of medical necessities. Joe knew she should refuse, the townspeople were already talking, but something in his expression, a loneliness that echoed her own, made her nod. They sat on the back steps, the ones Eli had rebuilt, each cradling a cup of coffee that was strong enough to float a horseshoe. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. I killed a man once, Eli said suddenly. Joe's cup paused halfway to her lips. She waited, knowing there was more. Not in war, not in self-defense, in cold blood. He stared into his coffee like it might hold absolution. He was one of the men who set up my crew. Found him in Cheyenne 3 months after. drinking in a saloon, laughing about it, boasting how he'd gotten rich selling information about cattle drives to raiders. What did you do? Waited till he left, followed him into an alley. Eli's voice was emotionless, like he was reciting someone else's story. He recognized me, started begging, saying he was just the messenger, that others made the plan, didn't matter, my men were still dead. Jo set down her cup carefully. Do you regret it? Every day. He looked at her then, his pale eyes glinting in the starlight. But I'd do it again. That's the hell of it. I'd do it again. They sat in silence for a moment before Jo spoke. I let a man die once. Eli's head turned sharply toward her. During the war, Confederate soldier, couldn't have been more than 16. Good shot. I could have saved him, had the skills, the supplies, but I'd just lost 3 Union boys, and I was so angry, so tired. Her voice caught. I told myself I was triaging, that his wounds were too severe, but the truth was, I chose not to save him. I let him die because of the uniform he wore. That's different. Is it? Jo's laugh was bitter. I took an oath to do no harm, to heal without judgment, but I judged. I played God, and a boy died because of it. War makes monsters of us all. No, Jo shook her head. War reveals the monsters we already were. It just gives us permission to let them out. Eli was quiet for a long time. Then, is that why you couldn't marry, because you'd seen your own monster? Richard, my fiancé, he wanted to marry the girl who'd left for the war. Sweet, innocent, untouched by ugliness. But that girl died somewhere between Antietam and Gettysburg. What came back was someone who'd held dying boys' hands, who'd sawn off limbs without enough laudanum, who'd chosen who lived and died based on the color of their coat. He couldn't handle that. He said I'd become... Jo searched for the words. Unnatural, hardened, that I'd forgotten my place as a woman. Your place. Eli's voice was flat. My place, Jo confirmed. Which apparently didn't include having opinions about suffering or death or the waste of young lives. I was supposed to come back ready to host tea parties and raise children, not wake up screaming about phantom limbs and missing faces. So you came here. So I came here, where no one knew the girl I used to be, where I could be the doctor I'd become instead of the wife I'd failed to be. Eli reached over and, very gently, touched the back of her hand. Just for a moment, just the briefest contact, but Jo felt it like a shock. We're a pair, aren't we? He said softly. The cowboy who can't save his men and the doctor who couldn't save her soul. Eli. My crew had families, he continued, pulling his hand back. Wives, children, sweethearts. I used to know all their names. Now I drink to forget them, but they just get clearer. Sarah Briggs had 3 little girls. Tom Morrison was getting married come spring. Pete Delacourt sent half his wages to his widowed mother. His voice cracked. They trusted me to keep them safe, and I led them straight to slaughter. You didn't know. I should have. That's what scouts do. We know. We see the danger before it strikes. He laughed harshly. Some scout I turned out to be. Jo turned to face him fully. You want to know what I think? Probably not. I think you're so busy punishing yourself that you can't see the truth. You survived. That wasn't cowardice, that was chance. Bad, horrible, unfair chance. And killing that man in Cheyenne. That wasn't justice, but it wasn't evil either. It was grief with nowhere to go but out. And your Confederate soldier? Jo was quiet for a moment. That was wrong. I know it was wrong. But I was 22 years old, covered in blood, and watching boys die faster than I could save them. I made a choice I have to live with. We all did things in those fields that haunt us. How do you stand it, the remembering? Some days I don't. Some days I want to laudanum myself into oblivion just to stop seeing their faces. But then someone like Jake Sullivan comes in with a split lip, and I remember that I can still help. Still heal. The girl Richard wanted to marry is dead. Yes, But the woman who survived, she has skills, purpose, even if she is unnatural. Eli smiled then, just slightly. Nothing unnatural about knowing your own worth, Doc.
Joe!
She said suddenly. If we're going to sit here confessing our sins, you might as well call me Joe.
Joe.
He tested the name, nodded. My ma would have liked you. She was unnatural too, could shoot better than any man in the county. Ran the ranch after Pa died. Scandalized all the proper ladies. What happened to the ranch? Sold it to pay debts after she passed. Used the rest to outfit myself for cattle driving. Figured if I couldn't hold on to land, at least I could keep moving. And now, Eli looked out at the stars. Now I'm fixing a lady doctor's roof and sleeping through the night for the first time in months. Ma would probably laugh herself sick. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. Two sinners finding absolution not in forgiveness, but in shared understanding. The weight of their confessions hung between them, but it was a weight shared now. Somehow lighter for the sharing. I should go in, Joe said finally. Early morning tomorrow. Joe, Eli called as she stood. For what it's worth, I think Richard was a damn fool. Any man who can't see the strength in what you've become didn't deserve you in the first place. Joe felt heat rise in her cheeks. And any crew that had you for a scout was lucky to have you. What happened after, that's not on you. They stood there, looking at each other in the starlight, and Joe felt something shift between them. Not attraction. Exactly, they were both too raw for that, but recognition? The understanding that comes from showing someone your worst self and having them not look away. Good night, Eli. Good night, Joe. As she went inside, Joe realized that for the first time since the war, she'd spoken about that Confederate boy without feeling like she might shatter. And Eli had trusted her with his darkest moment. Maybe that's what healing looked like, not forgetting the sins, but finding someone who understood that everyone had ghosts. Someone who could look at your monsters and neither flinch nor judge. In Dead Horse, where the dust never quite settled, two broken souls had found something unexpected, the beginning of absolution. Not from God or law, but from the simple act of being truly seen. Storm coming through. The clouds rolled in from the west like an advancing army, dark and heavy with the promise of violence. Joe watched them through the window of her office, noting how the air had taken on that peculiar stillness that preceded the worst storms. Even the ever-present dust seemed to hold its breath. She was setting a broken finger for Abel Thompson, the blacksmith, when Eli burst through the door. His face was grim, hat clutched in his hands. Joe, we need to talk, now! I'm with a patient. It's important. The urgency in his voice made her look up sharply. His pale eyes were alert, scanning the street through the window even as he spoke. Abel flexed his newly splinted finger. I can see myself out. Doc, sounds like trouble brewing. After the blacksmith left, Joe turned to Eli. What's wrong? Was in the Gilded Dollar, fixing some loose floorboards for Sam. He moved away from the window, keeping his voice low. Heard 3 men talking in the back corner. They weren't locals, had that look about them, like coyotes sizing up a chicken coop. Raiders. The Colton gang, unless I miss my guess. Been hitting towns along the railroad line. They were discussing Dead Horse, how many men carry guns, where the sheriff keeps his office, which businesses have safes. Joe felt her blood chill. When? Tonight, most likely. They want to hit during the storm. Use the noise and confusion as cover. Eli's jaw tightened. Joe, they mentioned the doctor's office. Said they heard the lady doctor might have medicine worth stealing. Laudanum, especially. Joe moved to her medicine cabinet, checking her supplies. I need to warn Sheriff Morrison. Already did. He thanked me kindly and suggested I move along before I caused any more trouble. The bitterness in Eli's voice was sharp. Seems he doesn't put much stock in the word of a drifter. That's absurd. You're trying to help. I'm Eli Cade, The man who sees ghosts and talks to shadows? Why would anyone believe me? Joe grabbed her shawl. Then we'll make them believe. Come on. They found Sheriff Morrison in his office, feet propped on his desk, reading a week-old newspaper. He barely glanced up when they entered. Dr. Calder, I see you've brought your friend. Sheriff, Mr. Cade has information about a planned raid. So he said. Morrison finally looked up, his expression skeptical. 3 mysterious men in the saloon, planning to rob us all blind. Convenient that no one else saw or heard them. I was working in the back, Eli said tightly. They didn't know I was there. Or maybe you're making up stories. Wouldn't be the first time you've seen things that weren't there, would it? Cade. Joe stepped forward. Sheriff Morrison, I've known Eli for 2 weeks now, and I've never known him to lie. If he says there's danger. You've known him 2 weeks. Morrison's tone was patronizing. I've known of him for 2 years. Every town from here to Laramie has stories about Eli Cade, the man who stands in thunderstorms shouting at the sky, the drifter who claims to see dead men walking. That has nothing to do with I, doesn't it? Morrison stood, his considerable bulk making the small office feel smaller. Look, Doctor, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not mobilizing the town based on the word of a man who can't tell what's real from what's not. Then mobilize based on common sense, Joe snapped. The Colton gang has hit 3 towns in the past month. We're the logical next target. If they come, we'll handle it. We always do. Morrison's tone suggested the conversation was over. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have real work to do. Outside, Eli's hands were clenched into fists. Should have known. Soon as they hear my name, I might as well be speaking tongues. We'll find another way. Joe's mind was racing. The mayor is Morrison's brother-in-law. The banker won't believe a drifter any more than the sheriff. Eli stopped walking, turning to face her. Joe, you need to get somewhere safe. Take what medicines you can carry and hole up until this passes. I'm not running. This is my home now. This is a building. Your life is worth more than... And what about the other lives, Mrs. Chen with her arthritis, the Hendricks baby with croup? What happens to them if raiders destroy my supplies? Eli stared at her, frustration clear on his face. You can't protect everyone. No, but I can try. Joe squared her shoulders. If you're right, and I believe you are, we have maybe 6 hours before dark. That's enough time to organize some kind of defense. With what army you heard, Morrison? No one's going to listen to me. Then they'll listen to me. Joe's voice was steel. I may be a newcomer, but I'm also the only doctor in 50 miles. That carries weight. Joe! No, I've run from one fight already in my life. I won't do it again. She met his eyes. But I can't do this alone. I need someone who knows tactics, who understands how raiders think. I need you, Eli. Something shifted in his expression, surprise. Maybe, or recognition. You'd trust me with this even knowing what I am. I know exactly what you are. You're a good man who's been through hell and survived. That's the kind of man I want watching my back. Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, but we do this smart. Can't face them head on, need to be clever about it. They spent the next hour visiting the businesses most likely to be targeted. Some storekeepers listened. Others dismissed them. But a few Sam from the saloon, Abel the blacksmith, old Mr. Garrett from the general store took them seriously. I've seen what the Colton gang leaves behind, Garrett said, checking his shotgun. If there's even a chance they're coming, I'll be ready. As word spread, opinion divided the town. Some sided with the sheriff, calling it hysteria drummed up by that crazy drifter and the lady doctor who should know better. Others, particularly those who'd been through raids before, quietly began preparing. Joe turned her office into an informal command post. She moved her most valuable medicines to a hidden cache, then helped organize the women and children who would need shelter if fighting broke out. Eli worked with the men who'd volunteered, setting up watch positions and planning defensive strategies. Joe watched him transform from the broken drifter to someone with purpose, his movements confident, his instructions clear and tactical. "You've done this before," she observed during a brief moment alone.
"I'll admit, yeah."
His expression darkened.
"Lot of good it did them."
"This is different. You're not scouting unknown territory. You're defending a fixed position with advance warning." "Maybe." He checked his revolver, the rust now cleaned away. "Joe, if this goes bad..." "It won't. But if it does..." She put her hand on his arm, feeling the tension thrumming through him. "We're going to get through this. All of us." As afternoon wore on, the storm clouds built higher, darker. The first drops of rain began to fall just as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Joe stood on her porch, watching the street. They had maybe a dozen men positioned around town, plus several women who could shoot. Not an army, but better than nothing. Eli appeared beside her, water already dripping from his hat. "The Hendricks family and some others are barricaded in the church. Abel's got the main street covered from his shop. Sam's upstairs in the saloon with a rifle. And Morrison, locked in his office, still insisting we're all fools." Eli's smile was grim. "He'll change his tune quick enough if lead starts flying." Joe noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes kept scanning the shadows. "Are you all right?" "Just remembering another time I waited for violence to come calling." He met her gaze. "But this time I'm not alone. This time I can do something about it." Thunder rolled across the sky, and Joe saw Eli flinch, but he held his ground, jaws set with determination. "He don't owe us nothing," Joe said quietly, remembering what she planned to say if anyone questioned Eli's motives. "That's why he's the only one I trust tonight." Eli looked at her, rain running down his face. "You really mean that?" "Every word." Joe pulled her shawl tighter. "Now come inside. No point standing out here getting soaked before..." A gunshot cracked through the storm, followed by shouting from the east end of town. Eli's head snapped toward the sound, his whole body tensing.
"They're here," he said. "Joe, get inside. Lock the doors."
"What about you?" He was already moving, checking his weapon one last time. "I've got debts to pay. To my men, to myself. Maybe tonight I can start settling them." Before she could protest, he was gone, disappearing into the storm-lashed darkness. Joe heard more gunshots, saw muzzle flashes lighting up the rain. The raid had begun. She gripped the doorframe, torn between the urge to follow and the knowledge that her skills would be needed here. Through the storm, she could hear voices shouting, glass breaking, the chaos of violence descending on dead horse. And somewhere out there, a broken cowboy was facing his demons in the rain, trying to save a town that had never quite accepted him. Joe said a prayer to whatever might be listening, then went to prepare her supplies. Before this night was over, she suspected she'd need them all: fire, gunpowder, and silence. The storm turned Main Street into a river of mud and chaos. Joe worked by lamplight, her hands steady as she sutured a gash on Sam's forehead. Through the window, she could see muzzle flashes in the darkness, hear the sharp crack of rifles over the thunder. "Hold still," she told the saloon keeper. "This will scar less if you don't move." "Doc, you should be somewhere safe." Sam winced as the needle went in. "I am safe. I'm where I'm needed." She tied off the suture with practiced efficiency. "What's happening out there?" "Your cowboy was right. Colton gang came in from 3 directions at once. Would have caught us with our pants down if not for the warning." Sam tested his vision, blinking away blood. "Last I saw, Eli was organizing the defense near the bank." Another man stumbled through the door, young Tom Garrett, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Bullet?" Joe asked, already moving. "Just grazed me. Doc, but there's a kid." Tom's face was pale with more than pain. The Hendricks girl, Lucy, she was supposed to be in the church but went looking for her cat. She's trapped in the schoolhouse, and there's raiders between her and safety. Joe's hands stilled. Lucy Hendricks was barely 8 years old, a sweet child who often watched through the window while Joe worked. Someone needs to get her, Tom continued. But the crossfire? Joe was already grabbing her medical bag. Where exactly?
Doc, no.
Sam struggled to his feet. You can't go out there. Watch me. Joe checked her supplies, quickly bandages, laudanum, surgical tools, everything she might need. She stepped out into the storm and immediately understood the chaos. Rain drove sideways, turning the world into a blur of water and shadows. Gunfire echoed off buildings, making it impossible to tell where shots originated. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to get her bearings. A figure materialized from the darkness, Eli, water streaming from his hat, moving with predatory grace despite his healing leg.
Joe, what the hell are you doing out here?
Lucy Hendricks is trapped in the schoolhouse. His expression shifted instantly.
Where?
Near the... A bullet whined past, shattering a window behind them. Eli pushed Joe into an alley, shielding her with his body.
Stay here, he commanded.
I'm coming with you. Joe. She might be hurt. You'll need me. When he started to protest, she cut him off. We're wasting time arguing. Eli's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Stay close. Move when I move. Stop when I stop. They worked their way through the back alleys, Eli leading with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. Joe could hear her heart pounding over the rain, feel the cold water soaking through her dress. Ahead, the schoolhouse loomed dark against the sky. There, Eli whispered, pointing to a side window where a small face pressed against the glass. Lucy, tears streaming down her cheeks. Between them and the school, 2 raiders had taken position behind an overturned wagon, firing toward the bank. Eli studied the situation with calculating eyes. I'll draw their fire, he said. When they turn toward me, you run for the school. That's suicide. That's tactics. His smile was grim. I've got good cover between here and that water trough. Trust me. Before Joe could argue, he was moving. The raiders spotted him instantly, swinging their guns around. Eli dove behind a rain barrel as bullets splintered wood where he'd been standing. Joe ran. The distance to the schoolhouse felt like miles. She heard Eli's revolver bark once, twice, keeping the raiders focused on him. Then she was at the door, yanking it open, calling out, Lucy, it's Doctor. Calder. The girl flew into her arms, sobbing, I'm sorry. I just wanted whiskers. Shh, it's all right. Joe quickly checked her over, scared but unharmed. We're going to get you safe. Through the window, she saw Eli still pinned down, the raiders advancing on his position. Her mind raced. They needed a distraction. The school's bell rope hung nearby. Without thinking, Joe grabbed it and pulled hard. The bell's bronze voice cut through the storm, loud and shocking in the chaos. The raiders spun toward the sound, confused. It was enough. Eli rose from cover, his movement smooth and deadly. 2 shots, perfectly placed. Both raiders crumpled. He materialized at the schoolhouse door moments later, breathing hard. Nice thinking with the bell. We need to get Lucy to the church. A cry from outside interrupted her. More gunfire, but different, desperate, panicked. Through the rain, Joe saw Abel the blacksmith stumbling down the street, supporting another man who was barely conscious. That's Pete Morrison, Eli said. The sheriff's son. Joe didn't hesitate. Get Lucy to safety. I'll help Abel. Joe! Go! She plunged back into the storm, reaching Abel as he nearly dropped his burden. Pete Morrison had taken a bullet to the chest, blood bubbling with each breath. Punctured lung, Joe diagnosed instantly. Get him inside the schoolhouse. Together they dragged Pete inside. Joe worked fast, knowing she had minutes at most. The wound was bad, but not hopeless if she could seal it, stop the air from escaping where it shouldn't. Her hands moved with remembered precision, the same movements that had saved dozens of soldiers. She barely noticed when Eli returned, having delivered Lucy safely. He stood guard at the door while she worked, occasionally firing at shadows in the storm. "There," she breathed finally, sitting back. Pete's breathing was labored but steady. "He'll need proper surgery when this is over, but he'll live." Abel gripped her shoulder. "Sheriff Morrison's going to owe you his son's life." "The sheriff owes Eli an apology," Joe said sharply. "None of us would be alive without his warning." More men arrived, townspeople who'd heard the school bell and came to investigate. The tide was turning. Joe realized. The raiders, expecting easy prey, had found a town ready to fight back. "They're pulling back," someone reported, "making for the East Road." Eli looked at Joe. "I need to go." "What? No, it's almost over." "Almost isn't finished. They'll regroup, maybe come back. Someone needs to make sure they keep running." He checked his ammunition with practiced movements. "Besides, I've got some ghosts to face." Joe wanted to protest, but she saw the determination in his eyes. This wasn't about the town anymore. This was about Eli proving something to himself. "Be careful," she said simply. "Always am." He paused at the door, silhouetted against the storm. "Joe, thank you for believing me, for trusting me." Then he was gone, following the raiders into the darkness. The next hour passed in a blur. Joe treated injuries, burns, cuts, bullet wounds. The church became a makeshift hospital, with women who'd been hiding now helping tend the wounded. Through it all, she listened for word of Eli. Finally, as dawn began to break through the dissipating storm clouds, riders appeared on the East Road. Joe's heart clenched until she recognized Eli's familiar silhouette. He rode alongside several townsmen, their horses mud-splattered and exhausted. "Raiders won't be back," Abel reported, grinning through his soot-stained face. "Eli here made sure of that. Tracked them 5 miles out, right to where they'd left their spare horses. We scattered their mounts, took their supplies. They'll be walking to the next county." But Joe's attention was on Eli. He dismounted slowly, favoring his wounded leg, and she saw something different in his bearing. The haunted look was still there, but tempered now with something else. Purpose, maybe, or redemption. Sheriff Morrison pushed through the crowd, his face a mix of emotions. He looked at his son, alive because of Joe's skills. Then at Eli, who'd led the pursuit that ensured the raiders wouldn't return. "Cade," he said gruffly, "I owe you an apology." "You owe me nothing." "Sheriff," Eli's voice was level, "I did what needed doing." "You saved this town." "We all saved this town. I just saw the storm coming first." Morrison extended his hand. After a moment, Eli shook it. As the crowd dispersed, Joe found herself alone with Eli in the muddy street. The sun was breaking through the clouds, painting everything gold. "You did it," she said softly. "Did what?" "Faced your ghosts. Led men in a fight and brought them home safe." Eli was quiet for a long moment. "They weren't my men, not really. My men are still dead." "But these men are alive because of you. That counts for something." "Maybe." He looked at her, and Joe saw a glimmer of hope in those pale eyes. "Felt different this time, like maybe I was fighting for something instead of just running from something." "And what were you fighting for?" Eli glanced around the battered but unbroken town, then back at her. "Home, maybe. Haven't had one of those in a long time." Joe felt something warm bloom in her chest. Dead Horse could use a man who sees storms coming. Dead Horse has one, whether they want him or not. "I want," Joe caught herself, felt heat rise in her cheeks. "That is, the town needs you." Eli smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Good thing I've still got work to finish on your roof then. They walked back toward the doctor's office together, navigating puddles that reflected the clearing sky. The town was waking up around them, people emerging to assess damage, children peeking out from doorways, life returning to normal. But nothing felt normal to Joe. Something fundamental had shifted in the night's violence. The broken cowboy and the bitter doctor had found something in the fire and gunpowder not healing. Exactly. But the possibility of it, the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build something new from the ashes of their old selves. And if the townspeople noticed the way the doctor and the drifter stood a little closer than propriety dictated, if they saw the gentle way Eli guided Joe around the debris in the street, well, after a night like that, some things didn't seem quite so important anymore. The storm had passed, leaving Dead Horse battered but standing, and in its wake, two souls who'd weathered their own storms finally began to see the possibility of clearer skies ahead the morning after the glares begin. The sun rose on a changed Dead Horse. Buildings bore scars from the night's violence, bullet holes in walls, broken windows, scorched wood where fires had been quickly doused. But the town had survived, and with survival came the inevitable return of its social order. Joe was changing the dressing on Pete Morrison's wound when she heard the whispers start. 3 women had gathered outside her window, their voices carrying clearly in the morning air. Living in sin. That's what it is. Mrs. Hartley's voice was sharp with disapproval. That drifter's been sleeping in her back room for weeks now. After what he did last night, another woman began. One good deed doesn't erase impropriety. Martha, if anything, it makes it worse. Now she'll feel obligated to him. Joe's hand stilled on the bandage. Pete, despite his pain, managed a weak smile. Don't mind them, Doc, he said. You saved my life. That matters more than their gossip. Does it? Joe finished the bandage with practiced movements. Your father seemed to think their opinion mattered quite a bit before last night. Pete had the grace to look ashamed. Pa was wrong about Cade. We all were. Through the window, Joe saw Eli working on the damaged storefront across the street, helping Abel repair what the raiders had destroyed. Several men worked alongside him, but she noticed the careful distance they maintained, the way conversations died when he approached. A hero for a night, perhaps, but still an outsider come morning. Rest now, Joe told Pete. I'll check on you again this afternoon. She found Eli behind her office, repairing the fence that had been damaged by stray bullets. His shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool morning air, and she noticed the slight hitch in his movements. His leg was bothering him again. You should be resting that leg, she said. He didn't look up from his work. Town needs fixing. Might as well make myself useful while folks still tolerate me. What do you mean? Come on, Joe, you've heard them talking. Hero or not, I'm still the crazy drifter living in the lady doctor's storage room. He hammered a nail with more force than necessary. They're already wondering what kind of payment you're accepting for my lodging. Joe felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but anger. Let them wonder. Easy for you to say. You're not... He stopped, shaking his head. I'm not what a man someone with a reputation to protect. Joe's voice was dangerously quiet. I assure you, Mr. Cade, women have far more to lose from gossip than men. Eli finally looked at her. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He set down his hammer, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. You've built something here, a practice, respect, a place in the community. I won't be the reason you lose that. That's not your choice to make. Isn't it? He gestured toward the street where Mrs. Hartley and her coterie were making their rounds, no doubt spreading their poison to willing ears. Come Sunday, Reverend Palmer's going to want to have a word with you about Christian propriety. By Monday, some of your patients will find reasons to delay their appointments. By month's end, they'll still need a doctor, Joe interrupted. And I'll still be the only one for 50 miles. That's a cold comfort when you're sitting in an empty office. Joe studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. This isn't about my reputation, is it? This is about you running again. I'm not running. No, then what do you call it? Being practical. Eli picked up the hammer again, but Joe grabbed his wrist. Look at me. When he did, she saw the fear there, carefully hidden. What are you really afraid of? For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I'm afraid of staying, of letting myself believe I could belong somewhere again, because every time I've believed that, I've lost everything. Joe released his wrist, but didn't step back. And if you leave now, what do you lose then? Before he could answer, they heard hoofbeats approaching. Sheriff Morrison rounded the corner, his face grim. Miss Calder, Cade. He touched his hat brim. Reverend Palmer would like to see you. Doctor, at your earliest convenience. Regarding... Morrison shifted uncomfortably. He didn't say, ma'am, but he mentioned something about guidance. Joe's jaw tightened. Tell Reverend Palmer I'll be available after I've finished treating the wounded from last night's raid. Unless, of course, he considers gossip more important than medical care. I'll tell him. Morrison turned to go, then paused. For what it's worth. Doc, not everyone agrees with the busybodies. Plenty of folks remember who sounded the alarm last night. After he left, Eli resumed his work with renewed vigor. You should go. No point antagonizing the Reverend. I'll go when I'm ready. Joe watched him work for a moment. Will you be here when I get back? His hand stilled. Do you want me to be? Yes. The simple word hung between them. Eli nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. Joe found Reverend Palmer in his study at the church, hands folded over his substantial belly. He was a man who enjoyed his position and the power it afforded him over others' souls. Ah, Dr. Calder, please, sit. Joe remained standing. I have patients waiting. Reverend, what can I do for you? His face pinched at her refusal to play along with his authority. It's more what I can do for you. My child, I'm concerned about your situation. My situation? Having that man residing on your property. Surely you understand how it appears. It appears that I'm providing medical care to someone who needed it, unless Christian charity has gone out of fashion. There are proper channels for charity. The church would have been happy to what, turn him away because he doesn't fit your definition of deserving? Joe's voice was steel. I took an oath to heal the sick and injured. I don't recall it having exceptions for those the church finds inconvenient. Palmer's face reddened. Dr. Calder, you're new to our community. Perhaps you don't understand how quickly a woman's reputation... My reputation survived a war. Reverend, I think it can survive housing a patient. He's more than a patient now. Isn't he living there, working for you? People talk. Then perhaps you should counsel them about the sin of gossip. Palmer stood, drawing himself up to his full height. I'm trying to help you, doctor. A woman in your position, unmarried, alone, you cannot afford to thumb your nose at propriety. Watch me. Dr. Calder. No, Reverend, you watch me. Joe stepped closer, her voice low but fierce. Watch me treat the sick without asking for their church attendance records. Watch me save lives without checking whether they're worthy. And watch me provide shelter to a good man who risked everything to save this town. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Reverend, you didn't survive all that fire to be burnt down by whispers. She left him sputtering, red-faced and speechless. Outside, Joe nearly collided with Mrs. Morrison, the sheriff's wife. The older woman steadied her, smiling slightly. That was quite loud enough to hear through the door, she said mildly. Good for you. Mrs. Morrison. My boy is alive because of you and Mr. Cade. Her voice was firm. As far as I'm concerned, that man can live wherever he pleases. And if certain people have nothing better to do than gossip, well, That says more about them than it does about you. Small comfort, Jo thought as she walked back to her office, but comfort nonetheless. She found Eli exactly where she'd left him, the fence now repaired. He looked up at her approach, a question in his eyes. "Well, Reverend Palmer is concerned about my eternal soul," Jo said dryly. "Apparently it's in danger from proximity to you." "Jo?" "I told him to mind his own business, in slightly less polite terms." Eli stared at her. "You what?" "You're not the only one who can face down threats. Eli Cade." She moved past him toward the office. "Now come inside. That leg needs looking at, and I have other patients coming." "You just told off a reverend for me." "I told off a hypocrite who values appearances over actions. The fact that it was about you is incidental." But they both knew it wasn't incidental. As Eli followed her inside, Jo caught sight of Mrs. Hartley across the street, watching with pursed lips. She met the woman's gaze steadily until Mrs. Hartley looked away first. "They won't forget this," Eli said quietly. "Good. Neither will I." Jo turned to face him. "I've been judged by better people than Prudence Hartley and found wanting. I survived. This is nothing. This is your home." "No, this is where I live. Home is—" She paused, searching for words. "Home is where someone knows your worst self and doesn't ask you to leave." Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then, "By that measure, I haven't had a home in years." "Neither have I." Jo met his eyes steadily. "Maybe it's time that changed. For both of us." The bell over the door chimed, announcing her first patient of the day. The moment broke. But something lingered, a promise. Perhaps. Or just the possibility of one. As Jo tended to her patients and Eli continued his repairs, the town buzzed with gossip. But for the first time since arriving in Dead Horse, Jo didn't care. She'd found something worth fighting for, worth weathering the storm of public opinion. And if that something happened to be a broken cowboy with pale eyes and gentle hands, well, she'd been called worse things than unconventional. The whispers would continue. She knew, but whispers, like dust, eventually settled. What remained was what you built in spite of them, what you fight for, you build. The wagon bounced over another rut, and Jo heard the clink of medicine bottles in their padded crates. Beside her on the driver's seat, Eli handled the reins with practiced ease, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. It had been 3 months since the raid, and their routine had settled into something that felt dangerously close to permanent. "Thompson Ranch is just over that rise," Eli said, pointing to a distant cluster of buildings. "Old man Thompson's been down with that lung ailment for 2 weeks now." Jo consulted her notes. "His daughter said he's been coughing up blood. Consumption. Possibly, or just a severe infection from working in all that dust." She closed her notebook. "Either way, he needs treatment." This was their life now, Jo's mobile practice, taking medicine to the isolated ranches and mining camps scattered across the territory. Eli serving as driver, guard, and extra pair of hands when needed. The arrangement had started out of necessity but had evolved into something neither quite knew how to name. They pulled into the Thompson Ranch yard to find Mrs. Thompson waiting, worry etched deep in her weathered face. "Thank the Lord you're here. Doctor, he's been getting worse." Jo grabbed her bag and followed the woman inside. Leaving Eli to tend the horses, she found Josiah Thompson propped up in bed, his breathing labored and painful. After a thorough examination, she prepared a mixture of herbs and laudanum. "It's not consumption," she told Mrs. Thompson, who sagged with relief. "But it is a serious infection. He needs rest, this medicine 3 times daily, and absolutely no work for at least 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Thompson tried to sit up, triggering a coughing fit. "Who's going to bring in the hay?" "Someone who isn't trying to die," Jo said firmly. "Your life is worth more than a harvest." Through the window, She saw Eli talking with the Thompson boys, gesturing toward the fields. By the time she finished giving instructions to Mrs. Thompson, he'd organized a plan for the neighbors to help with the harvest. "Your man's got a good head on his shoulders," Mrs. Thompson observed, walking them out. "Shame what folks say about him in town." "He's not my man," Joe corrected automatically. Mrs. Thompson just smiled. "If you say so, dear, but I've got eyes. That's a man who'd walk through fire for you." On the ride back, they stopped by the creek to water the horses. Joe sat on a fallen log, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Eli stood nearby, vigilant even in this peaceful moment. "The Thompsons think you're my man," she said suddenly. Eli's hand stilled on his horse's neck. "Do they now?" Mrs. Thompson seemed quite certain about it. "Mrs. Thompson sees what she wants to see." He didn't turn around. "We both know what we are." "And what's that?" "Business partners. You needed protection for these rides. I needed work. Simple arrangement." Joe stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "Is that all we are? Eli business partners?" He finally faced her, and she saw conflict in those pale eyes. "What else could we be? You know what I am. What I've done." "I know exactly who you are." She stepped closer. "You're the man who builds things, steps and fences and trust, who organizes harvests for sick neighbors, who stands guard while I work because you can't bear the thought of anything happening on your watch." "Joe, you're not the same man who lost his crew. Eli, that man couldn't have done what you've done these past months." "Haven't I? I'm still running. Joe, just found a prettier place to do it." Joe felt frustration rise. "You're not running. You're building. There's a difference." "Is there?" His voice was bitter. "Every ranch we visit, every family we help, I see my men in their faces, the lives they should have had. And so you help give others those lives. How is that not noble?" Eli laughed, short and sharp. "Noble. That's a word I never thought anyone would use for me again." "Then you haven't been paying attention." Joe moved closer still, close enough to see the gold flecks in his pale eyes. "Do you know what I see when I look at you? A broken-down cowboy camping in your storage room. A good man who's forgotten his own worth." She reached up, touched his face gently. "A partner, a friend, maybe something more, if we were brave enough to name it." Eli caught her hand but didn't pull it away. "Joe, you deserve better than—" "Stop." Her voice was firm. "Stop deciding what I deserve. I've had enough of men making that choice for me." They stood frozen for a moment, her hand against his cheek, his fingers wrapped gently around her wrist. Then hoofbeats in the distance broke the spell, and Eli stepped back, hand moving instinctively to his gun. It was just a ranch hand heading home, but the moment had passed. They finished watering the horses in silence and continued their journey as the stars began to appear. 2 weeks later, they were preparing for another trip when Sam from the saloon appeared at Joe's door. "Doc, Eli, thought you should know there's been trouble at the Wallace mining camp. Cave in, they're asking for help." Joe was already grabbing supplies. "How many injured?" 6, maybe 7. One's just a boy, Charlie Wallace, not more than 14. Joe's heart clenched. She'd treated Charlie for a broken arm last year, a bright kid who'd been working to help his widowed mother. "We'll leave immediately." The ride to the mining camp was tense, Eli pushing the horses as fast as he dared on the rough terrain. They arrived to find chaos men covered in rock dust, women weeping, the partially collapsed mine entrance like a wound in the hillside. "Over here, Doc," someone called. Joe worked tirelessly through the night, setting bones, stitching wounds, fighting to save lives. Eli worked alongside her, holding men down during painful procedures, fetching supplies, offering quiet words of comfort to the frightened. Young Charlie Wallace was the worst, crushed ribs, internal bleeding. Joe did everything she could, but as dawn broke, she knew it wasn't enough. "Doc, Charlie's voice was weak, frightened. Am I dying? Joe took his hand, throat tight. I'm here. Charlie, you're not alone. Tell Ma. Tell her it don't hurt. Don't want her worrying. Joe squeezed his hand, unable to speak. Eli knelt beside them, his voice gentle. She knows you're brave. Son, bravest kid in the territory. Charlie smiled slightly. Then his breathing hitched, slowed, stopped. Joe sat back, exhaustion and grief washing over her. Another life she couldn't save, another ghost to carry. She felt Eli's hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. You did everything you could, he said quietly. It wasn't enough. It never is, but you gave him comfort at the end. That matters. They stayed to help with the aftermath. Joe treating the surviving miners, Eli helping shore up the dangerous sections of the mine. The camp foreman tried to pay them, but Joe refused. Consider it part of the service, she said wearily. On the long ride back to Dead Horse, Joe found herself crying for Charlie, for all the ones she couldn't save, for the weight of trying to heal a broken world with nothing but determination and a medical bag. Eli stopped the wagon, wordlessly pulling her against him. She sobbed into his shoulder while he held her, one hand stroking her hair. I'm supposed to save them, she whispered. You're supposed to try. That's all anyone can do. When her tears finally stopped, Joe pulled back, embarrassed. I'm sorry. That was unprofessional. To hell with professional. Eli's voice was fierce. You're human, Joe. You're allowed to grieve. They continued home as the sun set, riding in companionable silence. At the edge of town, Eli spoke again. That boy, Charlie, he wasn't alone at the end because of you. Because of us. He glanced at her. That's what we build. Isn't it not just healing bodies, but being there, showing up? Is that enough? Sometimes it's everything. As they pulled up to the office, Joe saw Mrs. Hartley watching from her porch, lips pursed in disapproval. For once, Joe didn't care. She was too tired, too raw, too aware of how short and precious life could be. Eli, she said as he helped her down from the wagon. Thank you, for today, for all of it. He squeezed her hand briefly. Partners. Remember we show up for each other. Partners. The word felt both too small and just right. As Joe went inside to wash the dust and sorrow from the day, she found herself thinking about what they were building together, not just a medical practice or a reputation, but something harder to define, a life, maybe a future. Whatever it was worth defending, worth the gossip and glares and small-minded judgment of people who'd never held a dying boy's hand or faced down raiders in the rain. She set a cup of tea on the porch step before going to bed, their signal that all was well, that tomorrow they'd load up the wagon and do it all again. Through her window, she saw Eli pick it up, saw him smile slightly. They never talked about what they were to each other, not really, but maybe they didn't need to. Maybe the building itself was enough one day. One patient, one act of showing up at a time. You still ain't slept, have you? The fever came on fast, turning Joe's world into a blur of heat and confusion. One moment she was treating Mrs. Chen's arthritis. The next, she was collapsing against her examination table. Skin burning, vision swimming. Doc, Mrs. Chen's voice seemed to come from very far away. Dr. Joe. Joe tried to respond, but her tongue felt thick, clumsy. The room tilted, spun, and then darkness claimed her. She woke to cool hands on her forehead and Eli's voice, tight with worry. That's it, Joe, come on back. Her office swam into focus. She was on the examination table, and Eli was beside her, wringing out a cloth in a basin of water. His face was haggard, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. What? Her voice came out as a croak. Typhoid fever, he said, gently placing the cool cloth on her forehead. You've been fighting it for 2 days. 2 days Joe tried to sit up, but the room spun violently.
My patients
are being looked after. Eli pressed her back down gently. Doc Sullivan came from Laramie. He's handling things. Sullivan's a drunk.
Sullivan's staying sober because I told him what would happen if he touched a bottle while you were sick.
There was steel in Eli's voice she'd never heard before.
Now stop fussing and rest.
But rest wouldn't come. The fever pulled her under again, into dreams that weren't dreams but memories given twisted form. She was back in the field hospital, but the soldiers' faces kept changing, becoming Charlie Wallace, becoming the Confederate boy she'd let die, becoming Eli with blood on his chest, asking why she hadn't saved him.
No,
she moaned, thrashing against invisible restraints.
No, I tried.
Shh. Cool hands caught hers, held them steady.
It's the fever talking. Joe, you're safe. I've got you.
She forced her eyes open. Eli was still there, hadn't moved. How long had he been sitting there? His shirt was rumpled, jaw dark with stubble, and his hands trembled slightly as he squeezed water from the cloth.
You need to rest, she managed. Can't sit here all.
Hush. He smoothed the cloth over her burning skin.
Stop trying to doctor me when you're the one sick.
The fever pulled her under again. Time became elastic, meaningless. Sometimes she woke to sunlight, sometimes to lamplight, but always, Eli was there, giving her water when her throat burned, holding her steady when the chills racked her body, talking to her in a low, steady voice when the nightmares got too bad. Tell me about Kansas, he said during one of her more lucid moments. Before the war, what was it like? Joe found herself talking, words spilling out between sips of water. About her father's library, her mother's garden, about deciding to study medicine when nice girls were supposed to study embroidery, about the boy who'd courted her before the war, bringing flowers and bad poetry. What happened to him? Eli asked.
Died at Bull Run.
Joe's voice was matter-of-fact. Most of them died, one way or another. The ones who lived came back different. Like me. Like me, Eli echoed softly. The fever broke on the 3rd day, leaving Joe weak but clear-headed. She woke to find Eli slumped in the chair beside her, finally asleep. In the lamplight, she could see how much the vigil had cost him, the deep shadows under his eyes, the lines of exhaustion carved into his face. She tried to sit up quietly, not wanting to wake him, but the movement must have registered. His eyes snapped open, immediately alert.
Joe!
He leaned forward, hand moving to check her forehead.
Fever's broken, thank God.
How long have you been sitting there? A while.
Eli.
You'd have done the same for me. He stood, stretching stiff muscles. I'll get you some broth. Doc Sullivan left instructions. Joe caught his hand as he turned to go.
You still ain't slept, have you?
He went very still. Then, slowly, he turned back to face her.
What?
These past 3 days. You haven't slept, have you? Eli's jaw worked. I caught a few minutes here and there.
Liar.
Joe kept hold of his hand, feeling the calluses, the strength, the slight tremor of exhaustion. Why? For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was barely above a whisper.
Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought you might.
He stopped, swallowed hard. I couldn't lose you too, not when I could do something about it, so I stayed awake. Joe felt tears prick her eyes. This man, who'd been running on empty for so long, who'd finally found peace in sleep, had given that up for her, had chosen to face his demons awake rather than risk not being there if she needed him.
Eli,
she breathed. Don't. He pulled his hand free gently. Don't make it more than it was. You needed someone. I was here, that's all.
That's everything.
Joe struggled to sit up, ignoring the way the room swayed.
Don't you see you chose to?
Joe, please! His voice cracked. I can't. I just got you back. Don't make me think about what could have happened. Not yet. She saw it then, the raw fear in his eyes, the desperate edge of a man who'd come too close to losing something precious. Again. All right, she said softly. But Eli, I'm here. I'm going to be fine. Because of you. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Now, Joe continued, trying for a lighter tone. About that broth. The next days passed slowly. Joe chafed at being confined to bed, but her body wouldn't cooperate with her impatience. Eli had moved his bedroll into the main office, refusing to leave her alone while she recovered. He helped Doc Sullivan with the simpler cases, proving surprisingly adept at following medical instructions. You'd have made a good doctor yourself, Joe told him one evening, watching him prepare one of Sullivan's prescribed tonics. Nah, Eli measured carefully. I'm better with building things than fixing people. Aren't they the same, taking something broken and making it whole? He brought her the tonic, waiting while she drank it. Maybe, but buildings don't die if you make a mistake. Neither do people. Always, we just do our best and hope. Eli sat on the edge of the bed, a familiarity that would have scandalized the town gossips, but felt natural now. After everything. Is that what we're doing our best? What else is there? He was quiet for a moment. Then, when you were at your worst, when the fever was so high, I thought... He stopped, took a breath. You kept saying you were sorry, over and over. I tried. I'm sorry. I tried. Joe looked away. The fever brings out old ghosts. I know. His hand found hers. But Joe, whatever you think you failed at, whatever you're still carrying, you don't have to apologize for trying. Not to me, not to anyone. She squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. And another thing, he continued. When I thought I might lose you, all I could think was how much I'd left unsaid, how I'd been too much of a coward to tell you. He stopped, seeming to gather courage. I didn't want to dream without you in it. Joe's breath caught. She recognized the words, an echo of what he'd said that night she'd been sick, but weighted with new meaning now. Eli, I know we don't talk about it, what this is, what we are. He met her eyes steadily. And maybe we don't need to. But I wanted you to know. You matter to me. Joe, more than I probably have a right to feel. Joe turned her hand in his, interlacing their fingers. You have every right, and you matter to me too. So much it scares me sometimes. Scared is okay. Scared means it's real. They sat in comfortable silence as shadows lengthened outside. Finally, Joe spoke again. You need to sleep, really sleep. You're no good to anyone running on empty. Old habits, Eli said wryly. Then make new ones. Joe shifted, patting the bed beside her. Lie down, just for a few minutes. Joe, that's not... Proper. Since when have I cared about proper? She tugged at his hand. Please, I know you won't go far while I'm still recovering. At least rest here where I can keep an eye on you. Eli hesitated, then carefully stretched out beside her on top of the covers, maintaining a careful distance. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed him, his breathing evening out into true sleep. Joe watched him in the lamplight, this man who'd kept vigil over her for 3 days and nights, who'd chosen her life over his own peace, who'd finally admitted, in his own careful way, what she'd been too frightened to name. Sleep well, she whispered. I'll be right here when you wake. And she was. Through the night, through his dreams and her waking moments, they kept watch over each other. Two broken souls learning that sometimes the most powerful medicine wasn't in any bottle or tonic, but in the simple act of staying, of choosing each other, over and over, against fever and fear and all the ghosts that haunted them both. In Dead Horse, where the dust never quite settled, love looked like sleepless nights and cool cloths on burning skin, like shared vigils and whispered truths, like two people too stubborn to let go, even when letting go might have been easier. It looked like healing. It looked like home. Tonight, maybe. The autumn evening was crisp and clear, the kind that made the stars seem close enough to touch. Jo sat by the fireplace in her office, a book open in her lap but unread. Her attention kept drifting to the man across from her, who was mending a bridle with the same careful attention he gave to everything. 6 months had passed since her bout with typhoid. 6 months of shared days and careful distances, of partnership that danced around the edges of something more. The town had mostly given up gossiping about them, resigned to the peculiar arrangement between their doctor and the former drifter who'd become as much a fixture in Dead Horse as the saloon or the church. "Eli," Jo said suddenly, setting aside her book, "do you ever think about leaving?" His hand stilled on the leather. "Leaving? Moving on, finding somewhere new. You stayed to let your leg heal, but that was," she calculated, "almost a year ago now." Eli set down the bridle, giving her his full attention. "You trying to get rid of me, Doc?" "No." The word came out faster than she'd intended. "I just wonder sometimes if you're staying because you want to or because you feel obligated." Obligated. He tested the word like it was foreign. "Jo, I haven't felt obligated to anything since my crew died. Everything I've done since then has been choice, including staying." "But don't you want more a place of your own? A life that's not just protecting someone else's?" Eli stood, moving to the window. The lamplight cast his profile in sharp relief, the strong jaw, the lines that spoke of weather and worry, the eyes that had seen too much but somehow still held kindness. "I had a place of my own once. Ranch my PA left me." He spoke quietly. "Sold it after Ma died. Thought if I kept moving, I could outrun the loneliness. Then I lost my crew and wasn't just running from loneliness anymore, I was running from myself." He turned to face her. "But here I stopped running. Not because I had to, but because I found something worth standing still for." Jo's heart hammered in her chest. "Eli." "Let me finish." He moved closer, but still maintained that careful distance they'd both observed for months. "I know what people say, that I'm taking advantage, that you're too good for the likes of me. Hell, maybe they're right, but Jo, every morning I wake up and choose to stay. Not out of obligation, out of want." "What do you want?" Jo's voice was barely above a whisper. "You know what I want." His eyes held hers steadily. "Question is, what do you want?" Jo stood, the book falling forgotten to the floor. "I want to stop pretending that what we have is just convenience. I want to stop leaving tea on the porch like it's some kind of business transaction. I want—" She stopped, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was about to say. "What?" Eli prompted gently. "I want to stop being afraid of wanting more." They stood facing each other, the fire crackling in the hearth, years of careful boundaries trembling between them. "I ain't slept in days," Eli said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. "Not properly. Keep thinking about time passing, about all the things I should say but don't, about how I wake up every morning grateful you're there and terrified it might be the last time." Jo's breath caught. "Eli." "But you could fix that tonight." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Not just the sleeping, all of it. The pretending, the careful distances, the being afraid. Jo took a step closer, then another, until she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking for whatever you're willing to give. A chance, maybe, to be more than partners, more than friends. To build something that's ours, not just yours with me helping." Jo reached up, touching his face the way she had that day by the creek. But this time, he didn't pull away. "You know the town will talk. Let them." "Mrs. Hartley will have apoplexy." "She'll survive." "Reverend Palmer will demand we make it proper." Eli's hand covered hers. Maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing. Jo's eyes widened. "Eli Cade, are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we stop dancing around what we both know is true." He turned his head, pressing a kiss to her palm. The rest we can figure out as we go." Joe felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally letting the walls drop. "I love you. I think I have for months." "I know," Eli said simply. "Just like I know you see past the broken parts to something worth saving. Just like you knew I'd stay awake for 3 days straight rather than risk losing you." "We're a pair of fools," Joe said, laughing through her tears. "Maybe, but we're fools together." He drew her closer, and Joe went willingly, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady heartbeat that had become as familiar as her own. They stood there holding each other, not with passion, but with the deep certainty of two people who'd found their way home. "Stay," Joe whispered against his chest. "Not in the storage room, not as my hired man. Stay as whatever we're brave enough to call this." Eli pulled back enough to look at her. "You sure? Once we cross this line, there's no going back. The town, we'll have to accept it or find another doctor." Joe's voice was firm. "I'm tired of living for other people's approval. I want to live for this. For us." Eli smiled then, the rare, real smile that transformed his face. "Then close your eyes." Joe called her. "I'll be right here when you wake." It was an echo of her words from months ago, but now they carried new weight. Joe did close her eyes, feeling his lips brush her forehead in a gesture somehow more intimate than any passionate kiss could have been. "I love you too," he said quietly. "Have for so long I forgot what it was like not to." They moved to the chairs by the fire, but this time Joe curled against Eli's side, his arm around her shoulders. The book lay forgotten on the floor. The bridal could wait until morning. For now. There was just this, the fire's warmth, the quiet certainty of love finally acknowledged, the promise of all the tomorrows they'd build together. "We'll have to tell people," Joe said eventually. "Tomorrow," Eli agreed. "Tonight, let's just be..." And they were two souls who'd found each other across miles of hurt and loneliness, who'd learned that healing wasn't always about medicine or time, but about having someone who saw your worst parts and chose to stay anyway. Outside, Dead Horse settled into sleep. The saloon quieted. The church bells marked the hour. And somewhere, Mrs. Hartley was probably planning tomorrow's gossip. But inside the doctor's office, beside a dying fire, Eli Cade finally found the peace that had eluded him for so long, not in sleep, but in the quiet breathing of the woman in his arms, in the certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. "No more nightmares," Joe murmured, already half asleep. "No more running," Eli agreed. The fire burned down to embers, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and in that gentle darkness, two people who'd thought themselves too broken for love discovered that sometimes the most beautiful things were built from pieces that didn't quite fit anywhere else except together. Morning would come with its questions and challenges, with proper proposals and wedding plans and all the complications of turning a partnership into a marriage. But tonight was for stillness, for peace, for the quiet miracle of love that had grown in the harsh soil of the frontier. Tonight, finally, they could both rest. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you relaxing at home, on your commute, or perhaps winding down for the night? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And let's connect over our shared love of frontier romance. If you enjoyed Eli and Joe's journey, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more authentic tales of love and redemption in the American frontier. Don't forget to like this video and hit the hype button to help this story reach more listeners who appreciate genuine, heartfelt storytelling. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to share more stories with you. Until next time, partners.